So, I have a little bit of background noise, and maybe my dog will join in very soon with the other. But so, I think firstly, there. Sorry, just give me 1 second, please.
See, Rahul, willy-nilly, you have to start.
No. I think Ditya is quick with the dog.
um, so, I think firstly, we've had 15 responses from the participants on the Google form that we sent, and I think that's pretty much everyone, because we've kept it anonymous. I don't really know who has said what, but I think we're about like at the maximum we've been about 15, 16 people. So I think most people have submitted, and we've looked through the responses, and it's been quite helpful for us to figure out a what seems to have stuck and what we should maybe think about covering in the face-to-face sessions that we plan to have. So it was really useful to go through that, and we've kind of built this last session a little bit around some of the requests that were made. I think a few people had asked for some kind of a let's look at everything together once just before we close, so that because it's been a few months, and if anything needs a recap, then this is probably going to be some of that. And we will Suraj will go through some of those aspects of by evaluation, and then just broadly what things that we look at in terms of design implementation, evaluation, things like that. And then we'll talk through some of the things that you all have indicated in the form, just to make sure we've understood correctly what you all are saying. And there's a small, not a small, actually, quite a big assignment that there will be for you all to sort of take on between now and when we meet face to face. And this is primarily to deal with you applying to your work exactly what you all are picking up from here. And also because a few of you all had mentioned that we would have liked a Vikramshila example as opposed to the sort of generic examples that we had used, through the session as cases. So the assignment will cover both these aspects. And of course, there are some things that we will discuss face to face, and you will also have the opportunity to reach out to us individually in case you're getting stuck somewhere, instead of having to wait till we meet. Right. So that's, I think, broadly sort of just laying out the session. And I think Suraj will take it from there. Right?
Yeah. Thanks, Ditya. So we'll start, and I'll try to keep it brief, just kind of reminding ourselves as to what were the different aspects of evaluation that we covered across all these sessions. So sort of going back to some of the slides we used as we introduced different topics. And of course, in this kind of a course, we have the luxury of asking, what is the purpose of evaluation? What do we mean by it? And we've tried to kind of explore that slightly abstract question. Even though in day-to-day work, as we know, there's not too much room to maneuver. There are set things that we have, set pieces of information we have to collect, set templates in which we have to make reports, either because donors ask us or we've committed to it ourselves through our own past. So, I mean, very often I find that organizations don't have that luxury to ask. To elaborately make sense of how they've gone about an intervention, to what purpose, who did it really affect, what can we learn from it, right? Because sometimes we work on very kind of set tracks. And so I just wanted to remind all of us, one of the purposes of this course is to take us out of that everyday kind of report writing and bhagdod, and ask this fundamental question: why evaluate? And so this is just a summary of what we've been discussing. So we've talked about different approaches. Many people take a very method-centric way of looking at evaluation. Survey karna hai, survey kuch results hai, usko present karna hai, right? We've talked about that in different sessions. There are other ways of doing it that some people take a very use approach to evaluation. Evaluation is helpful only if it can tell me something on a very practical basis about my program tomorrow or next week, right? And so there are different ways of thinking about it. But at the end of the day, the term evaluation, as we noted at the very beginning of this series of sessions, the word evaluation has the term value, right? Mulyankan, value. And so it is really the effort to put value on different aspects of an intervention, right? And when we say, does something work, what is the value we put to some intervention which we believe makes some difference, right? So that's that. We had occasion to use this diagram, I think, across several sessions. And so just to remind all of us, it is useful to think of the life cycle of an intervention almost, right? Or a career of an intervention as having some kind of design phase, which is anything, right? Pre-implementation, followed by, gathering of some inputs and the creation of activities. Activities are a flow, right? And so these activities lead to certain program outputs. And this world of inputs through the flow of activities to reach certain outputs, that is really the program space. That is the space that an intervention interveners have more control over. And so there we can think about monitoring on a day-to-day basis. How are those activities functioning? Are there any red flags? What can we do? Right? And this is an ongoing activity that most organizations do. And so we need some shorthand ways. And so we think of indicators and so on. So monitoring is very much part of this space of translating inputs through activities to program outputs. But more generally, this is the implementation space. There is the second space, which is the second arrow here, from program outputs to social outcomes. And so how do we know that a certain set of outputs that a program has generated make some difference, and what kind of difference does it make to people's lives? In the case of education, maybe the immediate thing may be to the lives of kids that the intervention is meant for. But by lives of kids, we might mean their learning levels, their confidence, it could be their relations, it could have spillover effects into families, and so on, right? So all of those, the world outside the immediate program space is a world that we as interveners have less control over. But the hope is that if we think about it well, the hope is that we deliver outputs which then trigger changes which make ultimately outcomes that we care about. Children's learning, other things with children, other things with families, and so on, right? So therefore, these terms that we've been using repeatedly, these are terms we, of course, we knew that you all knew and used, but it was worth kind of putting it in this manner through this kind of diagram. So inputs, program outputs versus social outcomes, right? So this was key. And so we have this kind of linkage here, the program space, the implementation space, and then we have this kind of linkage here, which is ultimately what we care about, right? After all these activities and everything is in order to generate outputs which will make some difference to social outcomes, right? So everything at the end of the day is meant for this. And so this kind of two-part way of thinking about a program or an intervention we thought it was useful, and this was sort of how we structured these set of sessions, right? And so terms like impact have to do with ultimately what difference did the program make to social outcomes. Social outcomes could be learning levels. Remember, anything at all that we felt was a good in itself. Now, conducting some classes or and so on is not a good in itself, right? We are hoping it's a means which will lead to something else that we ultimately value. So that's the difference between an output and an outcome, right? An output is something a program delivers in the hope that that makes some final difference to people's lives, which is the social outcome. So this is sort of how we did it. And you can see that there are two sets of flows which bind these together. The flows of activities which bind inputs to outputs, right? Nothing is linear. I mean, these arrows look like, oh, we put some inputs and lo and behold, you get some outputs. I mean, much of our work as implementers is in the nitty-gritty of this, right? And a lot of heartbreak and heartburn and so on, and getting these things right, and lots of things, right? But the world of it's a flow, which flows over time, right? So there could be changes over time. And so, which is why monitoring has to be a continuous activity, right? So it's a flow. And the second flow is between these two, between the delivery of a program output and the culmination into some social outcome. And one of the examples we took when we looked at theory of change was the Tamil Nadu integrated nutrition program, about counseling pregnant and lactating mothers, if you remember. And so let us say that program gave them good information, about hygiene and nutrition. But it's a different matter whether children's nutrition levels improve as a consequence, right? That depends upon many things, such as changes in behavior at home, relations that these mothers might have with their partners, with others in the family. All of that would have to be navigated in, and that's outside the program space. So just to remind ourselves, this is the space which is closer to the program. This is the space that we ultimately hope to make a difference in, right? So this first space is for making some difference in the second space, right? So in that process of converting program outputs, such as in the case of TINP, so many nutrition counseling sessions done with these women, telling them about this, that, and the other, those are outputs, right? X number of sessions done, X number of amount of material given to them, X number of films shown to them, whatever, as opposed to outcomes. And so how do outputs get translated into outcomes? And that is the flow of social processes. Lots of different things would have to happen in terms of behaviors, in terms of people internalizing certain information or not internalizing that, in terms of other things affecting. In the case of those women in TINP, they were very poor. Many of them had to go for day labor. That would affect their ability to translate whatever they're learning in these nutritional counseling classes into actual practices which affect their children, right? So all of those, that's a set of flows, right? And there is no easy formula to do this, but one of the purposes in these sessions was to remind ourselves that nothing can be engineered so perfectly. And so we need to know this space of how outputs get converted into outcomes. And we need to know this space, which is a space that interveners are a little more familiar with, how inputs get converted into outputs, the space of monitoring and implementation. So so this space is internal to the implementing organization. This is external to the implementing organization. It has to do with understanding how things work in society outside of the program space, right? Okay. Then just going on, we looked at three broad ways of segmenting evaluation or putting a value on different aspects of a program. One is the design phase, before we actually mobilize inputs and do activities, right? Before that, how do we justify a program? How do we conceive it? That's the design phase. And then we have the implementation phase, which is the space from inputs to outputs, right? And then we have the evaluation of impact, which is from output to outcome, right? So we sort of uh, devoted sessions to each of these. Now, some people, depending on what they're interested in, put more emphasis on some of these over others, right? So our approach through these sessions was to ensure that we have a good kind of deep sense of all of these. And so, as Dvitya indicated, we'll later discuss which of these matters more to you, or which should we focus on more during our workshops and so on. But just to remind ourselves, there are all these things, design, implementation, impact, when we think about putting a value, evaluation, putting a value on an entire intervention. And within design, we had identified 3 particular kind of steps, you could say, or aspects. One is needs assessment, and that has to do with what is the social situation that we want changed. Okay, kids' learning levels are unacceptable, right? Or violence in families is unacceptable, or whatever it is that we pick up as interveners to make a change. A needs assessment is to do with that, right? To get a sense of what is it that before our intervention exists and needs change from. So there's a very strong value element in the needs assessment, right? What is it that the intervener feels is needs changing, right? Then the second aspect of design was program choice, because for any particular aspect that we feel needs changing, children's learning levels or particular aspects of learning are unacceptably poor and need to be fixed or improved. Well, presumably there are many programmatic ways of doing that, right? You could, and different organizations focus on, for example, TAL, right, teaching at the right level, is a particular programmatic intervention that Pratham, through its work, feels is strongly important in different contexts. So that's a particular program choice. There could be other program choices to affect the same outcome, right? And so, so this issue of program choice is really helping us ask, what are the different ways in which that need potentially can be fulfilled? And from my own perspective, from the perspective of my organization, maybe what we are good at doing, or given the limitations of what funds can be mobilized from donors. I mean, there are many, many considerations, practical, which might help determine program choice. So program choice is really about justifying the particular form that an intervention takes in order to potentially fulfill a need. And the theory of change we spent a fair bit of time on, which is really imagining how an intervention will play out from start to finish, right? But it's an imagining. That's where the term theory is there. When we say theory of change, there's an imagination of how an intervention will play out till the end, but it's an imagination we have before we start. Right? So the reality of how a program works may be different from the imagination that was written up, let's say, drawn up in the theory of change. So the theory of change is hence a part of design. Okay? And we talked about different ways of doing it. We looked at some examples and so on, right, of theory of change. So, and the second aspect of evaluation among these 3 is implementation. The idea of monitoring is part of the second part, implementation. This is the space from inputs to outputs, right? From program inputs to program outputs. And lots of different things regarding that. In fact, we had a series of questions of each of these, so maybe I can move to that. The third is evaluating impact, which is the last set of things we did, right? Last several sessions were spent on this. And so the real question is, how do I know what change in society happened which can be attributed to my program, right? What difference did my program make? So now it's about outcomes, right? So it's no longer about inputs and how my program got implemented as much as however it got implemented, what difference did it make, right? And what are the processes through that? So that's impact. So really the number 3 is really from the output to the outcome space. Number 2 is from the input to the output space. And number 1 is the pre-input space, right? How do you imagine and justify a particular intervention? Going through, maybe we don't need to go through each of these questions in depth anymore, but just to remind ourselves that we had a set of questions for design. What was the underlying problem or need? Why choose this particular form of program? How was it expected to function? And even in principle, if you did such an intervention, did we expect it to really address the need? In what way? And then we might have other meta values we want in an intervention, such as participation. Was the design done in a participatory manner? Of course, participation is a whole thing in itself. Whose participation, right? And in India, at least in our cultural context, we have certain kind of power dynamics we think of when we think of participation. We think of gender, we think of caste, we might think of religious sectarian groups, we might think of definitely class, economic class, I mean, and so on, right? So for every context, we might want to insist on some kind of participation for every aspect of the program, from design to implementation to understanding impact. So that was the 5th question. Moving on for implementation, which is the input to output space. We can ask a lot of specific questions. Were the planned activities mostly implemented, right? We need some information to know what did not get implemented well, what are the gaps. And so typically we use indicators for this. And so we did talk a little bit about what are useful ways of thinking about indicators, numeric indicators, other indicators. Since activities are a flow and they flow over time, it could be that implementation changes over time, especially for programs which run for a while. It could be that for some months it's one way, some months it's other way. So we need to take time seriously, which is the 3rd question here. 4th question again is about the meta value of participation. And the 5th question is monitoring, which I indicated earlier. Monitoring is a much more continuous thing that we want to do as implementers. Final set of questions was on impact, which is the program output to the social outcome space. So straight question is the first question: what was the impact? How do we characterize the impact? It's a tricky one, as you know, because we need to do a comparison. A counterfactual business, create some control, or look at how things were before the program, and all kinds of issues with comparison, right? We spent some time on what's a reasonable comparison, how do you compare, in order to know what difference the program made. So this first question is a simple question to ask, but it's a very difficult one to really answer well. So much of impact evaluation is really about the first one. Trying to answer well the simple question: how much difference did it make to social outcomes, which I can confidently say was because of our program, right? That's the question. And then the other ones listed in the slide, indicators, after all, on what basis do we compare, right? So what outcomes are worthy of comparison? And so sometimes we naturally gravitate to certain set numeric indicators, and those are often very good, but often we limit ourselves. So we had these kinds of discussions, if you remember, and then going on, who was impacted, who wasn't impacted, why, did the impact address the need? Unintended consequences is something that we've discussed quite a bit here and there across sessions. And longer term impacts, because again, the output to outcome space, right, that translation is a flow, and it takes time. And so depending on when we choose to look at it, right, we pick up a particular moment in time. And so if we give it longer, especially with education related interventions, many things may be a little less visible because it takes longer to attain some kind of impact. So therefore time, which is the question number 5 here, becomes an important thing. Question 6 is the flow question. What are the processes going from output to outcome? We didn't spend much time on this for various reasons, though we did talk about it a little bit. So this would be the equivalent of the activities in the first space with the processes in the second space. And the last question is the participatory question, which we thought is a meta value, which is worth, that is raising for every aspect of a program, right? In terms of how we choose to do an impact evaluation, in terms of how we choose to implement and look at implementation, and how we choose to look at design, right? To what extent do we want participation, and have we achieved that level of participation? So we, for partly to remind ourselves, we put the participation question for each of these. Yeah, so this is sort of where we ended with, and then we had a last session on a couple of sessions on thinking about methodology and methods, a little bit along those lines, though we did mention that this needs a fuller face-to-face kind of interaction to discuss, and maybe in the context of a particular program. But Dvitiya was saying, I think is the feedback we got. We could take a particular one and look at its indicators, and its, if it was whatever was the method and methodology used, we could really maybe usefully discuss that. So yeah, we touched upon methodology towards the end, I think, but there's a lot more we can say about that. So yeah, I'll stop there. This was just a more elaborate than intended summary or reminder of all the things we went through. Now, some of these questions I think we addressed more fully than others now when I look back, because a whole bunch of questions in these last 3 slides. But this is just a reminder of all the things which are actually quite exciting to think about when we are thinking about changing something in society, right? And that's really where evaluation should be thought about. Every aspect of an intervention, from pre-implementation, which is the design, to implementation, to what happens after you produce some outputs, all of that, that's sort of been the running theme through all of these. It's in that sense a comprehensive way of looking at it. Okay, I'll pass it on to Dvitiya for now.
Thanks, Suraj. I just wanted to check if there are any immediate questions anybody had that you wanted to clarify before, and I mean, based on what Suraj just sort of walked through, so that we can take those on before I move ahead. So I think in terms of, as Suraj was talking, I was thinking about what is sorry, there's something.
Shall we take up the question now, Dvitiya, or yeah?
Sure.
So I don't know if everybody's seen question on chat box from Rahul, thinking of activity as a flow. Yeah, so it's a flow primarily. Well, Rahul has answered it in his second question, because it's a matter of time. So inputs, in some sense, once we've mobilized the inputs, we can just state here are the inputs, right? Outputs, once all the activities are done, we can state here are the outputs. But the doing of the outputs is what we are calling activity. So the culmination of activities are outputs, and outputs are not a flow in the sense we can count the number of classes which were held, right? The number of tests which were taken, right? These are you could see these as outputs. So simple counts of something to do with an intervention, right? Would be a culmination of what's happened so far, So so that's an output, but the doing of that is something which plays out over time. Hence, we call it a flow. So an activity and output are therefore highly connected, right? It's the culmination of activities which we call outputs. Yeah. So now I'm wondering whether it's so important to emphasize the flow part.
Yeah, no, because I was thinking, say, suppose outputs also, suppose I take a monitoring time frame, I might be monitoring at different time frames also. So in some sense, outputs that way also would be different at different points in time. So
very true, very true, right? It's still not a flow in the sense, and
you're not doing it over and over again, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So it's still discontinuous, even though it right, flow is continuous. I mean, if you want to make that distinction, but I'm realizing, beyond a point, that that's not a word.
In terms of many interventions are done as a kind of a not in a flow kind of a way. Because training programs and all are very, very like time bound manner. It's not like you're doing trainings over and over again. It's not unless you're looking at a very participatory, sustainable kind of movement kind of I think processes.
Very true. Yeah. So I think on an everyday basis, we use the word activity in the way in which this literature uses the term output. That's, I think, what the point you're making around, right? We think of activities as outputs. Not, in other words, it's just, okay, itna ho gaya. Right? Technically, according to this literature, that's an output. That's all. But they're so closely linked. The activity leads to an output in some sense. But yeah, I think we can take away some of this flow business and just say, what we did as implementing, we can call it, as we normally do, we call it activity. We can also call it output. That's
right. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, any other clarifications? One of the things I think Dithya will get us to come back to is, out of all these things, what are the things that we want to really go more, want to do more in the next set of next session, workshop at least. So in that sense, hopefully this overview was helpful. Not all of this is equally applicable to everybody, but we just felt, that's why I want to emphasize, the idea of this set of sessions was to kind of give us a fuller set of all the things which are interesting when we think of a program. Now, what is useful for a particular implementer in each of your cases may be different, right? So which out of this menu of options, so to speak, do we want to run with is a question we'll come to. But right now, the idea was to offer that menu.
Yeah, I think Suraj leaves me an interesting point to pick up, because I find that the most useful thing for me when it comes to thinking about evaluation is this idea of design implementation impact, and it stays with me no matter what I am doing, right? And some of you have indicated in the feedback, and it brought me much joy, that even when you're designing one training session, that you're thinking about it in terms of design implementation impact. Often we're very focused on either the impact piece, or we're really focused on the implementation piece, based on where we sit within an organization and what forms our day-to-day role. But I find this three phases almost of thinking about evaluation as being extremely sort of helpful, even to figure out, even if you're not externally evaluating a program, even for a program that you're looking at that you are implementing it, I find it's quite valuable, right? So then I could obviously not think about our program and this whole set of sessions as and your sort of comments as a evaluation of design implementation and impact. And I think that's kind of where I'm coming to this thing right now. And there a bunch of things that have been suggested by y'all, both as positives and as gaps in all three of these aspects, right? So broadly, I think in terms of design, the one sort of main thing has been from our end in terms of, I think, a, an accurate or a more contextual needs assessment, probably, because I think, imagine this is an organization that's implementing education programs in this particular region, and there is a certain understanding of what the needs could be for this from this kind of a program. And let's say the course was designed around that, right? So our choice of sessions, our choice of emphasis on certain aspects as opposed to certain others came from our imagination of what the needs of this particular group could have been. And I think we've seen that evolve through the session, mostly from, I think, feedback that y'all have given us in terms of this could have been a starting point, as opposed to the first few sessions were very theory heavy. We were not ready for these sessions immediately at the get-go, that kind of thing. So I think just to put this set of sessions in the evaluation framework, so to speak, in terms of design, there have been aspects that y'all have given us feedback on in terms of what we would change, and obviously in terms of implementation as well, right? To say, let us do things in the session, like we would like feedback on group things while we're doing it, as opposed to take it home, do the assignment during the week that's during the week that we don't meet, and then come back with a completed assignment. Clearly that's something in terms of how we imagine the implementation of this that that y'all have asked us to change, right? As well as even in terms of how the session as such is run, more breakout things for us to do, more focus on things that y'all are more heavily involved in, right? There's been a bunch of responses saying we want more could have been done on monitoring and monitoring indicators, and because that is something that we engage with every day. When we have to monitor our programs, and we would like to have spent more time on monitoring indicators. And there's also been some feedback about what kind of, about data and data analysis and those things that we've not necessarily covered, during the course of the session, in terms of what you would have liked included in the session. And in terms of, I think, evaluation of what we think is impact of, y'all having attended this course, we asked a question saying, what do you think is the most, like one thing that you think you will remember that will stay with you, after these sessions? Because honestly, in the short term, that's all we could possibly ask you, right? You will see maybe in the next 6 months, year or so, what are the things that are staying with you in the longer term? How is it sort of affecting the way that you implement, affecting the way that you deal with an evaluation, or when it happens to you, or when you have to sort of discuss an evaluation, how has this equipped you better to handle this, right? So we've very usefully received feedback on all of these aspects. And I think I wanted to check, though the way that we imagined it, we thought we would originally talk about this more than read your feedback. So we still want you all to have the opportunity to sort of tell us, if anything, start with, let's say, what do you think is like the one thing that will stay with you from, having attended these sessions, and also the one thing that you wish had been done in this course but has not yet been done, so that we can definitely either choose to address it in the face-to-face, or really have a conversation with you about why it may not be most suitable for us to do it at this stage of learning, you know. Yeah, so I mean, it's totally up to you what you want to share at this point, but it would be helpful for us to talk through some of the things that you all have, shared in the form, if possible. I'm not one of the core skills of a trainer is supposed to be comfortable with silences. I'm very uncomfortable in silences. I'm like, someone say something. So maybe if we're not so comfortable talking about what was significant, maybe it'll be useful for us to talk through what you would like us to cover in the face-to-face, right? Because that is the pre-design stage of that thing. So we really want to assess needs correctly. So
No, I think we are very used to classroom situation where since childhood. So if you tell us how to go about giving our responses in what order, then I think the responses will come.
I just have to randomly pull out
Yeah,
something.
yeah, because nobody volunteers. Like we don't know whether we should speak.
Which is a good thing to allow others an opportunity to speak. But okay, I'm just going to like I just hope. Okay, it puts me on the spot. Rahul, do you want to do this? Since you know them all well.
No, I don't know them all, so I know a few of them. So I might be partial towards those I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start with people whose cameras are on.
Shamorpita. Shamorpita sounds like
wonderful.
a good whole
Wonderful.
Shamorpita. No, Shamorpita doesn't want to do anything. No. Shamorpita is probably cooking.
No, actually, my network is a little scratchy. I've been trying to. I'm not.
Sorry for putting you on the spot, but the question really is, what would you like us to do in the face-to-face?
I think it would be great if we could like for me, I was looking a little bit at the analysis part as well. Like after we have a little bit of data at hand, and how should we go about the analysis part. So I think
Okay.
if we cover a little bit, little part of that during the face to face, that would be helpful.
That's well received. I just wanted to check. Do you already have data that you've collected that you can play with?
Yes,
Right?
yeah, we
Okay.
do.
Right. Okay. And if we need it to be shared with us before the session, that's possible.
Yes, that is absolutely possible.
Because at this point, I think the face-to-face, we want it to be absolutely customized to you. It should be your data, your projects, all of that, because we've discussed broadly things already. So if there is a certain set of data that you want to analyze, so we should have an idea of what kind of data, what does this look like, so that we can come sort of prepared with some suggestions for you, I suppose. But also given to sort of understand that we may question why this data was collected and how to begin.
That's completely fine. That would actually help us think through as well.
Right. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
We often have the same question, Vidya, that why did we collect this and what
Yeah.
we trying to do.
Yeah,
And also probably think on why didn't we collect this? We should have collected more.
Yeah, because a good analysis has to be based on what is the questions, right, that we wanted answered.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, it happens to me so much that you have to train yourself to think, what will this, because I think almost the default is, okay, we're going to collect data anyway, might as well collect this also, might as well collect that also. And then you have to train yourself to think, what is this data going to tell me, right? So I think that's what I was saying, we might have to encounter some of those questions as well in terms of क्यों किया, कैसे, ऐसे क्यों किया, and why, you know. Yeah.
I wish, Rahul, I really wish.
So he said Shamarpita must be cooking. So I was like, why did you take the example of cooking? And that is like so gender biased.
Pub is also gender biased than the way it's put here. So
I so wish, but I'm stuck at the SSA office right now.
Oh dear.
So,
So you will be needing a pub after this.
yeah, probably. Yeah.
Should we maybe move to Vaishali then?
Hi. So I've not attended the past 2, 3 sessions because I was away on the field or on leave. So I need to get back to that. But one of the things that really interested me since the beginning of the session was to start thinking about the theory of change for Vikramshila and how to develop that and how is it that we can adapt that according to each of the programs. So I think that is one thing that I feel that if we focus on it, would not just be a good learning exercise, but for our organization to have that sort of document would also be very interesting. So that's one thing that's coming to my mind right now. Sorry.
It's a very broad mandate. Suraj, any immediate thoughts? Theory of change for Vikramshila, meaning that's like one magnum opus to be written. Because I imagine there are different strands through which you're, let's say, trying to achieve the same broad outcome, which is better learning outcomes for children, right? So, well, let's think about that one a little bit.
it's a good one to have, right? And now how to get there to our satisfaction. That's so when organizations, and you can, if you Google up and see, there are many organizations which put a theory of change out there. Almost invariably, one is a bit disappointed because it's too abstract. Just some very big words about justice and equality, and and we will be participatory, right? It's a little so the thing is to keep it as grounded as possible, right? And sometimes it's a bit difficult. So I think it's a great one, Vaishali, to let's see how we can work towards it. Practically, what organizations try to do, I think, is actually create theories of change for the various programs. I mean, in practice, here are the 3-4 big things Vikramshila is doing, or 5 or 6, right? Here are their theories of change. Now, how do we put those into an umbrella, right? I mean, what's common? What's one thing emerging from all those? That might be a way to kind of tease out from more particular grounded ways, rather than just sit in a room and what is the organization like, because then we're inviting ourselves to over abstraction.
Yes, I feel that what we can do is that before we meet in March, or whenever for the workshop, the face-to-face workshop, I think us in smaller groups, or maybe we can have like one internal workshop where we start to think about these things so that we have some foundation work done before we meet you all and take it ahead from there. I mean, we can discuss it, Namrata di, Neni, and maybe take it ahead like that.
I think the assignment that you have will, I mean, we'll talk about it in a bit, but it will help to exactly what you're suggesting, Vishali, is to work on it in small pieces and then sort of figure how this all comes together as whether it comes together or not as one theory of change. No impact I intended to have, but okay. Okay, I'm going I'm just going to pull out people I can see. Megha, do you want to go?
Hi, am I audible? Yeah, okay. So yeah, I would agree with Vaishali actually. Since the beginning of the program, I felt, every activity is important, but when, the initial part, where we start is theory of change. And if we are more, if we have more clarity about it, I think the rest steps becomes easier to understand, like how and when we need, plan activities. So I guess I would like to understand theory of change more in Vikram Shila's context so that I can plan something with my program activities. So yeah, I would here agree with Vishali that I would want to know more about theory of change and feel confident enough that I can do it independently. Like if I had to plan. Yeah. That's
That's great. If I could just give you one piece of advice from now till whenever we meet, it would be I find it useful to think of everything I do from a theory of change perspective. Like even if it is in terms of I'm going to work out 30 minutes towards what goal, what is going to happen, what are the things that can fall away in between me working out and getting to this goal that I want to get to. So all of these things, I find just that um, sort of engineering your brain a little bit to think about what is the process that needs to be followed and what are the various things that can come in the way of this actually translating into action, right? So that would help. And of course, we'll come up, we'll sing about theory of change, and the focus on it, I think, is already heartening because very many large organizations don't even think about theory of change. So the fact that you're seeing value in it is very important, and we definitely will sort of help you work on it. Yes. Yeah, my brain does some very structured based things that help, but it's not the most rewarding uh, rewarding experience to be sort of a recipient of my brain's decisions. So, Vaishali, Riya, do you want to go?
So I kind of agree with, Vaishali and Megha. Maybe, it could be a huge thing, but kind of if you can help us with, initiating this process of even articulating the theory of change, so that would be something I would look forward to. And in terms of, the entire sessions that we have gone through, even though I've missed a couple of sessions, but I think my struggle was being more as a, someone as a resource person, training, more into giving academic inputs, even though I'm also playing a role of a manager, but somewhere, I did find some disconnect at times in design parts, perhaps. So, how to kind of, say as a program, being part of a program management, how do I see this, work throughout, like say from design till implementation, then, having these indicators. So I felt that even mapping these indicators, what we did in one of the sessions, so that was really helpful. So if we could do something like that, some exercise like that in the face-to-face session with one of our programs, that will be really helpful.
Definitely, it's definitely part of the plan. Also, to use it with programs that you all are currently working on, and maybe to think about not not just a full program, right? That you can apply some of this thinking even to smaller aspects of the program. And like I was saying before, I was really happy to see someone had said that when they're designing a training, they're thinking about it like this, right? Like three distinct phases. And I think this essentially what is called evaluative thinking can be applied not necessarily only broadly to a program perspective. So even in your individual role, my role involves giving X inputs to X people, you can very well do a needs assessment. You can think about what kind of training would you like to do, why this one, I mean, why this approach over another. So, and also the theory of change, right? And I think one of the things that's very, very important in doing a training is the theory of change, because we are saying we will give X inputs or X knowledge or X skills will be shared during the training, and we expect classroom practice to transform somehow, right? And there's so much that happens between us delivering these inputs and the teacher being able to change classroom practice, that I think it's very valuable if you're able to spend the time to think about what's the theory of change, right? And then I think we'll also be able to do monitoring slightly more efficiently, because you're then aware of what are the things that can go wrong here. Or even if everyone's read the training, everyone's done like good participation in the training, all of that training as such has gone off well, what is it that you need to pay attention to while the program is being implemented to make sure you have the outcomes that you set out to get, right? So I think the idea that this can be used in segments as well as like just within this group, you all have mentioned we want Vikram Shila's theory of change. Two, we would like to think about theory of change. To me, just designing an isolated training program. So the idea that there is value to this in all levels of program design and implementation is, I think, it's really nice to hear, and we should definitely try to work on it at whatever level is possible, and then try to bring it together somehow.
I just wanted to reiterate what Dvitiya just now said, because I think Riya, I think this is a very interesting observation, what you mentioned, which is, mostly your work is as a resource person, as a trainer, but you find something about a program which you have you want to comment on, even though you were not designing it, right? Your role is something else. So one is, of course, for the organization to have spaces where that kind of thing comes, and I guess you do. The other is that this kind of what Dvitiya was saying, evaluative thinking gives us some vocabulary, right? To be able to say, what is it about design where you felt something was, I think you said there was a lack of connect, or you could improve the connect. So one's own role may not be as an evaluator, or as you're not in the M&E part of Vikram Shila. I mean, not that you'll have a big in-house thing, but whatever. Your role is as a resource person. But you're still picking up things, right, about design, about implementation, about impact, which are useful. So one is, the logistics of how does one bring that up in the organization? And the other is, how does one put it? How does one articulate it? There, I think evaluative thinking, evaluative language may be helpful. And I think along the lines of what Dvitiya already said, generally having that approach, evaluative thinking, even if my own work is, ठीक है, कुछ sessions करना है, कुछ training करना है, but that thinking then comes through in terms. So I think it's a very nice point. I don't know what's the implication of this, Dvitiya, Rahul, for our workshop. I mean, but I think it's very nice observation.
I'm thinking about it
Thank you.
already, and I don't know that I have an answer, but maybe in the way that the groups are formed, we can figure, some not very program manager kind of approaches as well. Rashmi is back. Rashmi, would you like to go next?
Yeah, like I got disconnected because of call from the funder. So yeah, can you please repeat the question? Like on what?
Essentially, just discussing what would help you if we covered it in the face-to-face session. Like, what would you like us to cover?
Okay. Like for me, since I'm in a project where we work with the schools, with the government schools, so generally we have to evaluate each year, 1 year program. Like we have a project for a year, and then it get renewed. So what we have to show to the funder that what is the impact of the program. So how we could how this program can be designed, like what could be the evaluation, how we could do the evaluation of this, like for the children also, like what is their growth like learning outcomes, and in terms of teachers also, like since we provide support to the teachers on learning how to enhance the learning level of the children, so how we could design it or evaluate it to show the impact what we are doing.
If I could just ask, would you already have agreed sort of outcomes that you have to report on with this donor?
Yeah, we have yes, we do the baseline and end line of the children's. So we have a we do in the starting of the program, we do the baseline. At the end of the program, we do the end line. So this data we have, like how we can work on this data so that we can show the impact, or we can evaluate the whole program.
Right. So, okay. So there are two questions then. One being, what would be the most useful indicators to, most useful outcomes to monitor, and how do you then measure and analyze those metrics, so to speak, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But given the context that you have already agreed something with the donor in terms of this is what we're going to report on, right?
Yeah.
And would that be subject to change? Like, can you say we would like to monitor something else? Or not?
Hello. Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
no, I was just saying, are your indicators set in stone already?
Yeah.
So you cannot change them. You can't say, I want to
Yes.
monitor something different. Okay.
No.
Okay, thanks. Exactly. Yeah. So we will look at data and data analysis aspect of it for sure. Do you want to go next, Namrata? Namrata Rawat.
Okay, I was just waiting for that. So I think all my colleagues have already mentioned many ideas for the face-to-face interaction. So one thing that I want to be able to do during those 3, 4, or 5 days, I don't know how many days there are, but so I want to be able to actually reflect and analyze and also improve the design and the implementation plan for the program that I am leading right now. The reason being that I want to have a real-time feedback on whatever has been planned so far. So maybe so this program design and the implementation plan was made last year, but then it is still have a scope of improving. So that is something that I want to do, and maybe as part of assignment or group work, or however we want to do it. So in two terms, like I want to get a real-time feedback, like face-to-face, which is contextualized for me. But I also want to get feedback on the way I'm thinking. So as you mentioned about that, you reflect on TOC in each and every task that you do in your life. Although we do certain type of things, when it comes to any activity in our lives, because of the way we think, but I think I have never thought about using TOC, while making plans for my workout, or, or my grocery shopping or something else. So I think that is something which I feel is a higher order thinking. I am not there yet. And I think I would need your support to be there, to be at that level. And I want to be at that level, which is, I think, it looks very tempting, and, it looks as if, I will be able to enjoy, but right now I'm not at that level. So that is the reality for me. But I think so, as you mentioned, like, for example, if we teach children, so I think for now, the definition parts, the theoretical parts are very clear to all of us. But now we would like to have multiple examples, like using multiple modes as we use for children. So I think that is something that will help me also if we are planning our training sessions. So if we have examples, not just where we are analyzing TOC for organization, but also TOC for a program, or TOC for a personal activity, or TOC for a professional activity like training, as Riya mentioned. So, so I think overall, I would like to have a very program specific, kind of support, but also the way I am, perceiving these ideas in my mind. So that is what I'm expecting.
It's very, very useful. And it's also a very wide mandate, I suppose. But I think really important that you're thinking about how do I apply this with the work that I'm doing, which is great. And that's definitely what we hope will happen, right? Because you all knowing definitions means little. I mean, language is important, but it is not everything, right? The language, I think knowing the language is the first sort of step to this, so that when people are talking to you or when you're talking to people, everything seems to make sense. But then really thinking about how does it apply to me, and also what applies to me and what do I not want to take forward. That discretion is also important, because there may be constraints which prevent you from doing some things. And we are absolutely looking at program specific work and program specific sort of inputs on what you have done only. So I think a lot of what you said will get addressed for sure.
Yeah, and all the documents or the plans that I have made in the last 1 year is open for everyone to work on, to scrutinize them or critically analyze them. So I think that will be like I can make everything available. So it is there.
That's great. We might ask for it in a bit, just for us to have some idea of what we're going to deal with when we meet you. So
yeah.
Right. And Amrita, go show to go.
Yeah, so I'll also answer the question that what stayed with me, and what stayed with me is the diagram that Suraj again showed today, from input to output to, social outcomes. Because I think the two things that he added in this input output things that we keep getting from donors is this, the activities part of it coming in between, and the social processes coming. And, using the word social processes and social outcomes is what really made a difference for me in this entire workshop. That this is what is within our control, and this is what is outside our control, and this is what we need to plan for. The shift from the logic model to the theory of change and the suppositions that we have to make. So that is something that really stayed with me. And like I said earlier, that after that, 7-8 TOCs had to be made, and this kind of really helped in thinking. We're still in the process, but yeah, it was really helped. Also in the last workshop, Suraj showed that there are all these quantitative, qualitative methods. He had made a list and he showed us these are the ways that we could. But it is the qualitative that I was more interested in terms of how do we analyze it? Because quantitative we know is data-based, and there are certain numerical statistical ways too. But qualitative, how do we really go about thinking on it is not something that internally we have much knowledge on. But I think this is something that we will be able to do better, given our backgrounds in social science, not so much economics and statistics. But this is something that I think is something that is there within the organization, and if we build it up a little bit, we can work on it. So qualitative analysis is something, and there is this thing about social behavior change. This SBCC is something that keeps coming up in a lot of our meetings. We've heard about it, because eventually this behavior change that we want to see. So what are the ways that we can look at it, and how do we imagine it, and how do we plan for it and analyze it? These are the asks for the next workshop.
Thanks, Amrita. That's really useful. I think we'll have to discuss specifically what kind of methods will be possible in what direction, and maybe in some cases just lead you to sources of sort of understanding or acquiring specific skills, depending on how relevant across the organization these particular things are. If there is huge relevance across the organization, then maybe everybody participates. Else, if if only you want to take something on, then we can just sort of help you, guide you through where and how and things like that.
Okay.
Now I should have used some kind of order in which I was asking people to say. Now I have no idea. I only know Nanny has not yet spoken. Do you want to say something? Sorry, what would you like us to cover?
I think one of the most memorable things for me, there'll be two. So one will be that flow chart, input to output to outcome. that's sort of drilled in my head now. And that way of thinking, that throughout this program, those first 3 slides, evaluating design and looking at the flow chart. And the third thing was theory of change. We had extensive discussions on it, and that was the most fascinating bit of the course for me. In terms of what my suggestion would be for the workshop, face-to-face workshop, would be, you see, right now, some of us are interested in one particular aspect of the course, and some of us are interested in other aspects. But then the idea of getting everybody together for this course was also to sort of streamline everybody's thought process in a certain way, so that at the end it sort of comes together. So I would really request you to take any one example, and from start to end, just run us through how you would approach a particular problem, and just run us through the program choice, the program theory, the theory of change, all those slides, like answering every question very briefly, but just, sort of a demo. But I would really appreciate that. Oh.
I was going to ask Suraj to come in because I really don't know how to respond to that. Because anyway, Suraj, you want to say something?
I think it's a good idea, Nani. So, but in a sense, that will be kind of a capstone of what we've been doing in these sessions, as opposed to something else. So one kind of, because we'll only have X number of days, right, for the workshop, whatever it is. So doing this will be, I mean, do we want to do this, or okay, if we were to do some version of what Nani is saying, it would make sense, I think, to do it for a Vikramshila program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then the question is, do we have enough? So maybe even if, let's say, some of these questions we don't have strong kind of answers for, right? Because Vikramshila was not running these programs with these questions in mind. So then we maybe we can work separately with the leadership team to find out which pick one program and kind of run through it. If we were to do it, maybe that could be the beginning of the workshop, right? It could be a way of reminding ourselves what these online sessions did by taking a particular Vikramshila program and going through from needs assessment all the way to impact. Even if, let us say, some of those other things we may not have strong answers for, but then you're the people doing it. So even if there's no documented answers, you would have something to say, from your experience. So that could be a way. I think Rahul has some horses to hold.
No, that's for me.
Oh,
I thought the assignment will take care of Naini's all the khwaishes in life. Hazaro khwaishes.
It's just one big khwaish. No, so I mean, just sort of bringing together what Suraj and Rahul are saying, I think what we're hoping to do is really give you multiple versions of what you're asking for, Neni, which is, it all makes sense once I talk about what the assignment is. But generally, we want you to do some of this work and then bring it to us, and then we would maybe tell you, because one can only tell you what would I have done, right? That is the only way in which I can provide feedback, I suppose, at all, is what would have been my approach to this. So I think some of this will happen more as feedback than as demo. That's the only sort of difference in the way that I'm imagining this. But definitely, yeah, like Rahul saying, if things come a bit before, we have to meet face to face, and we could already have thought about this in terms of what would we have done in this context, and then that could be the demo that you're looking for. Yeah, but we definitely need it to be a Vikramshila program, and given we don't understand as much about Vikramshila programs as you all do, it would need quite a bit of input from you to tell us how XYZ was done, and then we can possibly brainstorm. Could there have been a better way to do it like this, right? Yeah. And you may think about it, some of these things already, in the sense of it was done in in a particular way, given what knowledge we had that time. And maybe we've already grown as an organization, and given the opportunity, if this situation presents itself again, we would do it differently. Already you might have that much, sort of evolution in thinking in the organization already. So, yeah. But I think you will feel as though you've gone through an entire sort of cycle of this during the session for sure.
Can you please reveal the assignment now?
No,
Anticipation has been
there are some
building up.
people who haven't spoken. So if anyone else has to say anything, otherwise I'll jump into the assignment. It's not at all as exciting as I have made it up here. Very straightforward. But anyway, let me just, does anyone else have anything to say? I have not gone through everyone yet. And
Yeah,
I'm
we've only
not
got 2 or 3 people,
back.
so if they have, yeah, might be worth checking.
Yeah. I think we haven't heard from Adib and Sayan for sure yet. And my sense is someone else.
I think Debanjana.
Oh, Debanjana.
Yeah, actually, all the people, मतलब सभी लोगों ने ये जो pointers था वो बता दिया है already. तो nothing I have to add. वही था मेरे लिए भी, वही था कि practical कुछ भी program जैसे मतलब मैं जैसे देख रहा चीज को कि किसी प्रोजेक्ट में मैं काम कर रहा हूँ, बट जैसे नीड असेसमेंट कैसे हुआ ये हमको शायद पता नहीं है. तो व्हाट इज द नीड असेसमेंट, क्यों हुआ, और इसके वजह जो इंटरवेंशन हुआ और आप उस इंटरवेंशन के अंडर में काम कर रहे हैं. तो दैट इज नॉट क्लियर एक्चुअली कि ये इंटरवेंशन क्यों हुआ. सो जैसे कि कोई भी हम प्रोग्राम विक्रमशिला के अंदर में हो या कोई भी एग्जाम्पल, दैट एग्जाम्पल जो आपके पास भी मतलब बढ़िया से डॉक्यूमेंटेड हो, इस तरह का कुछ भी हम ले ले और उसका ही हर पार्ट्स को क्रिटिकली देखे. जैसे एक था कि पैरामीटर्स क्या होना चाहिए, पेरीमीटर्स क्या होना चाहिए चेक करने के लिए. तो जो पेरीमीटर लिया गया वो सही है कि नहीं, जो मेरा वही एक्सपेक्ट है कि क्रिटिकली उस पूरा प्रोसेस को एक बार हम देखें एकदम क्रिटिकली. और दूसरा पॉइंटर वो था कि हम कुछ डाटा मिलता है उसके हिसाब में हम लोग, या बेसलाइन हो, हेडलाइन हो, या एनी अदर डाटा ड्यूरिंग द इंटरवेंशन हम कलेक्ट करते हैं, तो उसको कैसे एनालिसिस करना है कि ये जो हमारा जो प्रोग्राम है या इंटरवेंशन है उसमें कुछ सही में कुछ निकल के आ रहा है और जस्ट वी आर डूइंग रैंडमली, और मतलब इसमें कुछ इम्पैक्ट्स और देने की जरूरत है, ये हम पता कर पाए. थैंक यू.
अंडरस्टूड. And I think अब 2 चीजों के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. One is whether the process has been done or not, and दूसरा ये process document हुआ है कि नहीं, right? So if अगर आप program को join कर रहे हैं slightly delayed after design has already been done, and आप implementation stage में involve हो रहे हैं, then design aspects के बारे में कहीं information available है कि नहीं, what were the needs that were assessed, and ये program intervention क्यों चुना गया, right? So I think there are 2 aspects. ये process हुआ है कि नहीं firstly, and second कि कहाँ document हुआ है. I think to a large extent possibly पहला step होता है, second step may or may not always happen in organizations because of all the other things that you're involved with. So would be useful to think about both of these things for sure. And अगर डॉक्यूमेंट करना है कैसे करना है, so that it's not so much of a hassle कि आप एक डॉक्यूमेंट बनाओ इसके बारे में, but the sort of institutional memory जो है इसके बारे में वो बनी रहे, कि ये काम हुआ था और ये इसमें से इंफॉर्मेशन निकला था जिसके बेसिस पे हमने ये डिजाइन sort of डेवलप किया है प्रोग्राम का. So I think, yeah, we'll definitely think about this as well, and data analysis also based on अगर आपके पास डेटा हो then उसको कैसे एनालाइज करना है, and yeah, उसमें से क्या insights निकल के आते हैं. Definitely. It has happened again that someone has dropped out. He was supposed to speak. I was just like, okay.
Hi. So most of my colleagues have already covered the points, but one thing that Riyati has also mentioned, and yesterday only we were discussing this, like I'm not directly involved as for now with the designing portion of the program, but definitely with the implementation part. So uh, these sessions have definitely gave me some insight about the designing part and the theory of it, and that is definitely helpful. But as we are all looking forward now to relate to a program of our organization that we already know, that will help us more to understand practically what is going and the idea behind it.
Yeah, thank you. That is, I think that's the core of what we hope will happen in the face-to-face session, is you're being able to apply it to a program, to try and apply it to your, practical context and see if there are still any gaps in information, right? Would you like to learn something more, jo abhi tak we haven't covered, which will help you apply better? So I think that we definitely focus on that for sure. I think that's everybody. I'm just going to. You can see my screen, right? So this is essentially what we would like you to do between now and when we meet, likely to be at least early March, that will be the earliest. So essentially, we don't want to recommend who the group should be, because we don't necessarily know how you all sort of fit together, what the teams are within the organization, things like that. But so we're allowing for you all to figure that out in terms of, but keep the group small so that you can really give your inputs, have your questions heard, and raise whatever concerns you may have about these things. 2, maximum 3 people. Pick any program that you are directly sort of associated with, whether you manage them or you train in them, um, or you're only monitoring them, whatever your role is in the organization. But choose a program that you're directly associated with, so that you will have the largest amount of information about this program that is required, right? Write out a theory of change, however you want it. I've actually recently had to do a theory of change for a complicated program, and I found pen and paper most simple to do, right? Your thinking needs to come out, which is what is important. We are not particularly interested in beautiful looking boxes. So just however is most convenient to you, write out a theory of change. Try to imagine the various different, like the things in that chain that we were talking about, the inputs, what are the activities, what would be the outcomes, and what are the outputs and what are the outcomes, right? And in between inputs and the outputs, you will have what the activities are, and between outputs and outcomes, what are the processes, right? So try to think about all the things that are in your control, as well as the things that are not in your control that could influence the outcomes of your program, and as a result have an impact on how far you get with this, right? So this is like the core of what you all have to do, is write out this theory of change for any program that you choose. And then when you have listed out all the activities, you also need to think about, how would I monitor these activities, right? So if I want, what are the indicators that I would use for outputs? What are the indicators I would use for outcomes? What would I want to monitor, and how would I measure them, right? Let's say you think about if you think about learning outcomes, how would you measure learning outcomes? If I want to think about behavior change is far more complex, like Namrata was saying. What tools do we have immediately within the organization to measure behavior change, right? It need not be the most optimum answer to this. This is where is our current thinking currently about this, right? And then we can discuss anything, any improvements to any of this, we can discuss when we meet. And of course, think about the impact evaluation strategy. Thinking about what could be a comparison group, what would I measure, and how would I measure it to know that there has been an impact of our intervention, right? So this is essentially, it's three things, which are the three aspects of evaluation, design, implementation, impact, that we want you to choose a program and think through. You may have already done some of this with programs that are running, but it would be useful if you can look at it, and if you feel like this is great, then sure. But if you want to rethink it in some sense, you want to add things to it that have not already been done, then please do that. And then we will discuss this. You can reach out to us if you need help, if you get stuck somewhere during sort of time that we will not meet as well, right? So we will send out, I think, some sort of dates on which you can sort of reach out to us. So you've done some piece of work, and then you have some questions on this, and then you can send it to us, and then we'll get back to you so that you can proceed ahead of that. But we're open to sort of providing interim feedback. But broadly, we will essentially use these pieces of information that you give us to sort of anchor the sessions when we meet, right? So that's how we're imagining this. So yeah. Anything you want to add to it?
No, I think that was clear, Dvitiya. Yeah, maybe one is Rahul has put in the chat box by when we want to make sure they start doing in terms of forming groups. We should have a timeline. Also, maybe about what's the output of this? I mean, in what do we want to leave it to folks in terms of how they want to write this up or draw this up or put it in some slides? Or so maybe just a little bit of discussion on that.
Okay, in terms of dates, I think first we're on, what is today? On the 12th, right? So I would say give yourselves a week to think about groups, to discuss groups, and figure out what programs. But hopefully you would like at least a month to work through this, So if you were to start next week, then definitely it will give you, I'm not looking at calendar at the moment, but today is the 12th and 19th, the 20th, right? Yeah, by the 20th, if you can have your groups decided, then that will give you easily a month before, like, to work with all of this. We definitely want, in terms of format, of submission, we definitely want a written down theory of change. Whether you do pen and paper, digital, that's fine. And then we're happy for you to bring us a hard copy and show it to us in person if you want, of the theory of change. But the other things, it would be helpful to put it in some kind of document, right? Just Word doc is sufficient. If you would, there may be occasions where you would be asked to present your indicators to the rest of the group. So if you want to put it in a presentation, that works for us, but it's likely to be quite, since it's face-to-face, you can do it in whatever format you want, right? But it's just, we would like something to look at and be able to give feedback on. So it needs to be put down somewhere. Hopefully, a Google Doc would be quite straightforward. Just write it down in a Google Doc. If Excel works better for you, I'm happy to look at Excel files as well. Because typically some of these things get done in Excel. So if that's the preference, then that's okay. So just definitely need a theory of change written down. and definitely need the rest. I mean, and need the rest of it in any format that you would like, right? Word doc, Excel file, all works. But we would like one submission of 3 aspects, essentially theory of change, monitoring indicators, impact strategy. 3 submissions from each group would be useful. And by next Friday, if you all can just share what the groups are so that we know how many to expect, right? So we can prep for how many submissions we're going to expect and what kind of feedback time we need to factor in this gap between the till the face-to-face session, right?
Yeah, one thing to add from as Dvitya said, we wanted to see a TOC actually, right? However you do it, but and that those lists, of indicators and the strategy. One thing I observed from many of the assignments that we got, and generally because of the nature of your work, is people tend to just have bullet points, right? So use this as an opportunity to try to maybe push yourselves in terms of justifying, okay, here are my indicators, but what was my thinking, right? So if you can find some way to show कि ये indicators क्यों, इसमें सबसे priority ये वाला है क्यों, right? The क्यों part, same way with evaluation strategy. I think we are a bit used to cut and dried. These are the indicators. Here's a strategy. But okay, what are the different things which I weighed in my mind before I came up with something? If you can find some way to communicate that, I think that would be useful. Just the thought process behind these things. Yeah.
Definitely, because those are the questions we'll be asking you anyway. So if it's already shared with us, it prevents a lot of going back and forth, because the why is what is most important in any of this, is why are you choosing any of this, right? So yeah, if you can find a way to articulate it, then that would just make things easier for all.
Yeah, logistically, if for example, in a docx file, there are these common balloons you can put on the right margin, right? I think so that could be a one way, but some way to show, here's my output, here's my indicators, here's my this, that, and here is my thinking behind it. But in docx, the comment box is a simple thing, or some equivalent of that. Yeah.
I'll just upload this slide as well on that shared Google Drive so that you have this somewhere and you know what's the assignment. The other thing the one last thing I wanted to check, which was in terms of feedback that we've not addressed, is a bunch of people had asked for session handouts or some kind of post-session reads, right? So I think it would be helpful to maybe talk through some of that now to see what would be useful now that the course, in at least the online sessions, are now completed. What would be useful as a summary of these, right? Would you like us to share all readings that we referred to, or what kind of handout, so to speak, will be useful?
So I really don't know, Vidya, because beach में there were certain requests for the PPTs, and then some people who were really interested in a particular session, they wanted the readings for that session. So how about we just discuss it with the participants once, and then we get back to you on that? Namrata, is that okay?
Yeah, let's just discuss it internally and we'll send you a wish list.
sorry, I was saying it'll also help us think through what we should prep for the face-to-face session, you know, in terms of things to take away for you all to do. Okay, I guess that's it. No, Suraj, anything else? Rahul, you want to say something?
Nothing else. Yeah.
I think Shubhra had talked about two particular programs in Vikramshila at one point, which were very interesting. She had briefly described them. One was a so, and she had said that there was some documentation, and I don't know, and I guess given her experience, she really thought that those two. So I'm wondering whether there's some way we can get some information and we can try to work that into our workshop. I don't know. I mean, it just stayed with me. In fact, I remember the two
Which
that
are the
she
program, Suraj or Naini?
Hanji?
कौन सा program था ये?
The madrasa project, I think she was mentioning about it. I'll just confirm once
Yes.
with Shubhra ma'am, and then if in case, you know, whatever she still wants to take it up, then whatever is relevant, we'll forward it to you. Okay.
Yeah, it was the madrasa one, and the second one was some kind of skill building program.
Education to employability. Yeah.
I think.
Education.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that would have some documentation.
For some reason, in one of the sessions, she sort of spontaneously said, "These two, you know, we'd really like to do it." I mean, that
change, I think.
yeah,
So.
maybe, yeah. So if you can follow up, because I think because that was a very clear input she had given at that point. So if it works with our new plan, that would be good.
We'll do that.
And what Vaishali said about this organizational theory of change has been her long-term dream. So from the very beginning of the the sessions, she has been saying, we should try for something like this.
Yeah.
If we do it in the face-to-face workshop, it will be very useful.
And Shubhra ma'am will be very happy about it.
Awesome. I guess. Thank you then.
Thanks a lot, Dvitya, Suraj, Rahul. And yeah, we'll see you in the face-to-face workshop then.
Excited.
And miss
And
your
we'll miss
Holi.
you all
Just-
every Friday.
I think just plan to generally skip your Holi celebrations, I think.
That time.
Yeah, it's on the same.
No, we can use that as a case study, Rahul. We can evaluate its design and kill the celebration by evaluating it.
We could celebrate together.
That is one option. Yeah.
That is one option, she's saying, yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.